Hi, I'm Joe Hyde with San Angelo Live, and I have the mayor of San Angelo, Texas, Mayor Brenda Gunter, who is up for re-election May 1st. Early voting begins April 19th, which is Monday. We're recording this on a Friday, right before rodeo time. But Brenda, thank you for sitting down with us to talk about some of the issues that are facing the city of San Angelo.
Thank you for the invitation.
I'm going to start off with the hardest question I can. I hope the people at home don't think I'm like throwing softballs, but you've had one hell of a year. 2020, you had COVID, and I remember we talked when COVID started.
Yes.
We both thought it would last 15 days and we'd be over it, right?
That's correct.
15 days to stop the spread. Next, while we had COVID, we had the shutdowns, we had bars and restaurants under duress, which is a lot of sales tax revenue. Then, just as COVID seems like it's going to, relent maybe, we were peak COVID. Next thing that happens is we have a freezing February. Well, I know before that we had water contamination.
Yes.
Water contamination, which the entire water system was impacted except for the upper plane. So you have
Well, yes, yes. The upper plane was the first to get their water, though, on the contamination.
Right.
And then it worked its way down to the lower plane.
And we have an elevated city, so we have kind of like housing developments on the south and west side that are higher than the rest of the city, which is closer to the Contra River. So they have the upper plane and lower plane. First time I ever heard that from the water people.
Yes, but also remember where the water plant is.
Right, it's on
the river.
Where
the treatment, it's on the river, but it's down in the lower plane. So you got to start by getting water down there up to there. And also remember where the city of San Angelo started, on the lower plane.
On the lower plane.
So as the city built out, water lines were built out towards the northern plain or the high plain. So it's about, number one, where the water treatment is, where the water plant is, and where the city began.
Right.
Because that's where the water line started.
Right.
So it makes sense.
Right. So we had that problem. We had the contamination. And then we had the freeze, the great freeze,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And along the way, you got blamed for just about everything.
I did.
And we probably blamed you too. I don't know.
I don't know, but you would be the rare one who didn't try to do that.
So let's start back and let's talk about the COVID response and how do you think the city did during the pandemic, since we're kind of out of it, I think.
Yes.
At least until someone manufactures another one.
Yeah.
So how did we do?
Number one, I think we did terrific in terms of a city and the way we managed it. I think the hardest part for me was the following. Everybody thought I had the authority to close businesses down, and they blamed me for being the person who shut all the businesses.
But when you started the COVID response, explain it to me. I kind of know a little bit about it because I dealt with the public affairs portion of it. Kind of explain how you and the city leaders and the county leaders set that up, the response to the pandemic.
Well, number one, we made a decision that we needed to be a leadership team that met regularly, that talked regularly, and shared information regularly, so that everyone was on the same page, and we didn't have people who were putting out messages that would contradict other messages that were there. So we spoke all together with one voice.
Right.
And we made a decision that, on the other hand, that each organization, whether it was a school district, the county, or the city, would certainly have to live within the same regulations, but would develop their own game plan. What we did know for all of us was that we were being directed by the state of Texas. The governor for us as a city, the governor as a county, the school district from their higher up organization. But that being said, we all had the same things. CDC was putting out rules. We were asked to follow those rules. We weren't given options not to follow those rules. And so I think the clearest message that existed with COVID is the fact that it wasn't hopscotch. Like one area had one rule, another area had another rule. People understood what the directive was, what the expectations were.
So you had you had meetings with the county judge, the city mayor, city manager, I would guess was on there. Goodfellow's commander, the San Angelo ISD, probably Angelo State.
ASU, Howard College, Shannon Hospital.
And the thing that helped us from the news media perspective was all the official COVID-19 news was funneled through our city public affairs.
That's correct.
And I think that helped us because we get blamed for you know, we report a COVID story, we get blamed
Yeah.
for, you know, promoting fear or whatever, you know.
Well, and I think, you know, this was a situation that none of us had ever lived through. I mean, certainly our parents and our grandparents had to live through polio, some of them, certainly the 1918 flu. Generations ago had to, but we live in a different world today. We're a lot more urban than we were suburban back then, so it was a different
We're
environment.
probably more rural back in 1919.
Much more rural, okay? So we can call it suburban or rural, but I mean, it was rural. So
Yeah.
it was a different environment. And yet, what we were asked to do was to come together as a city and support each other and take personal responsibility. And I look at it and I go, number one, I repeat, I had no authority to close a business. The only people who have an authority to close a business is Governor Abbott and the health department, and that would be, the health department could if someone was very abusive relative
When
to...
you say health department, it's really Dr. Veretis who's the health authority. He's the one that's knighted by the state in a pandemic.
Yes, but I also say in general terms. For example,
see.
if we were not in COVID, and
Your health department could shut someone down for safety reasons.
that's my point. So
Just like a police officer can arrest someone and it's not your fault.
totally, that's exactly correct.
Gotcha.
But a mayor has no authority to do that. There is nothing that gives me that authority.
But you took the point, or you took the tact, or I guess maybe someone appointed you to kind of be the spokesperson
Yes.
for all these.
Because I was an elected official.
That's why you took the flack.
Yes, and that's okay. That was the job. I ran for mayor. Whatever comes with that job at the time is what you have to deal with. And COVID was something that was put before me that I had to deal with and become the spokesperson and become a leader that said, we'll get through this, but here's how we need to do it. These are the things we've got to do to get through this. And at the end result, our numbers and our ability to control the numbers and bring the COVID cases down said that there was something about our leadership team that helped us come together to do that correctly. We, when I say performed, we had really ultimately lower cases when they started taking.
When you say lower cases when compared to Plano, Texas, or
yes, but even out in West Texas, meaning that if you took a look as we were looking at that 15% number that ultimately the governor said you would have to shut down if your hospitalizations exceeded X, Y, and Z. We were the only city out here in West Texas, all the way up to Amarillo, who did not have to reduce the numbers again because we never hit 15%.
So when you say reduce the numbers again, what would happen is if our COVID-19 hospitalizations exceeded 15%
Yes.
of our bed capacity, then you would have to shut down the bars and reduce the capacity of
Correct.
restaurants down to what, 70, I don't know, 25% or something.
Correct.
Like that. And we didn't do that.
And we didn't have to do that.
Well, there's some people who say, and with a big smile on their face, that if you looked at the numbers on a day-to-day basis, not that I was doing that or anything, but
Of course not.
you would see the hospital beds would increase, the number of
Yes,
hospital
they did.
beds, which would help that percentage or keep that 15% down. So what was it, funny numbers, or what was going on there?
First of all, there was a chart that sort of told you each organization had to put in their hospital beds. So if you said, okay, in El Dorado, you have a hospital situation, you have X amount of beds.
Right.
So it was a regional bed count.
Yeah, it was Trauma Service Center K, which is like
Right.
basically the Concho Valley.
And it was confusing, so not everybody understood how to report the number of beds. But the biggest thing that impacted the number of beds is when Shannon bought the assets of Community and found there was a whole floor of beds that were never counted.
Behind some door that was like,
Well, because they were
Drywalled over?
using one floor of the hospital at that point in
see.
time. And so all of those beds had not been counted because they weren't using them as beds within that hospital.
I see.
So that's where the greatest number of beds came about. So only when Shannon and Community came closer together in terms of buying the assets did we realize the bed count was bad.
right. So it wasn't funny business.
It wasn't funny business, and it wasn't Brenda Gunter wanting to keep the restaurants open as I was accused of doing. It was not.
Right.
I did not have the authority to go through the hospital systems all over this region and count the beds. Wasn't my job.
You didn't drive around and count, but I would.
I didn't, okay.
All right, so that's COVID.
Yes.
The next thing to hit you was water contamination, where we had something happen probably on the northeast side of town.
Correct.
Where maybe a gallon of benzene, acetone, and naphthalene
Correct.
was found in the water system, and it caused us to shut down. You couldn't
Well, really
use
not the water, I mean,
in
not the source, yeah.
Water distribution system,
Yeah.
the pipes.
The pipes.
So are we ever going to find where that came from?
No.
You don't think we're going to find it?
No.
Why not?
Number one, too much time has gone by.
Mm-hmm.
So that has hurt. But number two, because it could have been anywhere from 1 gallon down to 1 cup. You know, when people thought about the contamination, they thought it was gallons, lots of gallons, and it wasn't. So there are combinations of things at this point. The source of that contamination, we don't know where it is.
So what are you going to do in the future to prevent something like that from happening? Because that's a big hit.
It's a big hit.
You know?
We, at City Council meeting, I believe 2 meetings ago, Allison Strube presented a program in terms of what will happen from this day forward, and that is a re-review of a lot of policies, plumbing issues, communicating to the public about how simple contamination could happen even in a residential home. So education, number one, communication, number two, changing some of the expectations in terms of where the plumbing is or isn't in a facility, meaning interior versus exterior, to prevent so much potential. So it's a lot of things. There will be several businesses who have to spend $10,000 or more to correct what their existing plumbing situation is.
So the city staff went out and inspected some
85 businesses.
85 businesses?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So are those businesses angry, or are they kind of, is the city going to do anything to help pay for it? I mean,
well, no, they are not going to pay for it. I'm sure there are some businesses that are angry. On the other hand, you don't want to be the business who is the next contamination problem. Mm-hmm. So I think legitimately most people are maybe irritated, but very willing to participate to make sure that the water contamination doesn't happen again.
And this new way to do plumbing, I'm going to call it the new way to do plumbing, or plumbing upgrade, is it going to be in a city ordinance?
Yes, they will.
They will change the code?
Yeah, they will change the code. But we're going to work through the Development Task Force, which is a group of certainly people who build homes, commercial developers, et cetera. We're going to have plumbers involved. We're going to have a lot of input from the development community as well as some residential people there as well, so that we hear from everybody and give us recommendations. So it's not going to be a heavy-handed, the City of San Angelo ordinance. It's going to be people communicating, talking, and deciding what the best strategy going forward and how that ordinance might look.
I see. How long do you think it's going to take to get that ordinance in place? A year, half a year?
I would say 6 months, worst case scenario, because we've done a lot of work in terms of investigating and understand what some of the potential issues could be.
So you found some vulnerabilities in this?
Yes, we
The
did.
investigation was not just a failure to find out what the source was?
There were some areas where we know there's room for improvement.
Okay. All right, so after you contaminated our water system, Mayor,
Yes, yeah,
you shut us down in our house. We couldn't go to our favorite bar, and then you contaminated our water, and then you froze the heck out of us.
It's amazing.
So
the power that I have.
The power that the
Mother
Mayor of San
Nature
Angelo.
looks to me for guidance, right?
In February, we're trucking along with the water contamination story, and then boom, February 14th, Valentine's Day, this gigantic freeze comes over Texas, and for the most part, I'm speaking from covering it. It seems like our water system held up pretty well.
It did, considering how cold it was, for how many days it was cold.
But we still had some issues with.
Of course, we
but
did.
Everyone did.
Everyone did.
So I guess what happened there was we were joking about the upper plain, lower plain. Well, the upper plain now was denied water. No one in Southland or the Bluffs or Bentwood could have water because they're elevated, and our water system lost pressure.
Correct.
Any lessons learned from that?
2 things, probably more than 2 things, but number one, I say the following, and that is we had, through this, an opportunity to really test the Hickory Aquifer water system and our ability to treat it.
Well, let's go back. Let's talk about
Okay.
the Hickory for a second. So the
Sure.
Hickory is 60 miles
60
of pipe.
miles.
60 miles of
Yeah.
pipeline. Comes from a big ranch down in McCullough where the city of San Angelo bought water rights down below, 400 feet down there, and they could pump it up, and they have their own separate, when it gets to San Angelo, that has its own separate water treatment system, because that water coming from that deep has natural radium in it, and they have to have special treatment plant for that. So it doesn't go into the same water treatment plant that all the other water goes into. And it was a vast expense. It was $121 million when they put this water plant and this pipeline system in. A lot of people complained about it, and they said it was a big waste of money, we shouldn't do it. So we have two water systems, really.
Well, we have surface water and we have underground water.
Right. So
and
we
our
have the
biggest,
lakes and we have the Hickory.
Yes, and our biggest problem as a city has always been our water sources were surface water, which means on hot days, evaporation is almost greater than actual usage.
Especially during droughts.
At droughts, and
I mean, there were proposals during the last drought in 2014 to put a tarp over Lake Nasworthy.
Yes. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But when you're down to 3 months of supply of water, you look for crazy things because you're like, we weren't ready to start using the Hickory water. The wells weren't drilled. It wasn't ready. So it was a scary time period. And it's not the only time we've gotten to that level of drought. And so,
well, so during the freeze, explain
Yes.
how the Hickory saved us.
okay, it saved us because of the following. We couldn't get water pressure built up. The water usage in the upper plains was 3 times the normal usage. So we couldn't get pressure.
So the normal water usage in San Angelo is 12 to 15 million gallons a day.
Yeah, and in the winter, remember, February is one of the lower months. So you're
Right.
going to be at 9,
Right.
around the 9.
9 million gallons
Yeah.
per day. And so I saw some of the flow rates, like 30 million, I mean 3 times.
Yes.
I mean, it was crazy.
It's crazy. And what was happening is when people were aware of this, they were filling up every sink. They were filling up bathtubs, as many bathtubs as they had. And there were even people in surrounding communities who had livestock who didn't have water, who were coming into town and filling up big water tanks full of water from people who had water to take out for their livestock.
Right.
So there were unusual situations happening with the water. So what happened was AEP worked with us to get the electricity from here to the Hickory Aquifer went down as well. They worked.
So in the middle of the freeze, like
Yes.
on Monday when everyone's freezing and water's still kind of running on Monday, but
Yes.
our electricity went out.
Yes. And so AEP worked with Encore, I believe is the electrical provider out there, and got that electricity, that power back on, which allowed us to pull into San Angelo about 9 million gallons, 8.5 to 9 million gallons a day.
Now, I've talked to Tim Combest, and he runs the water treatment plant for the city. He, back in the day, I'm talking like 3-4 years ago, back when we were discussing this gigantic $120 to $150 million water treatment plant replacement, he said he wasn't sure the Hickory could do more than about 9 million gallons a day. He was worried about it. He says, we never pressed to test that.
That's right.
So this is the first time we've...
It's the first time.
So before,
It
we were just
worked.
kind of trickling...
We're doing about 1.5 million a day just to keep it all working until we had a need, greater
Right.
need, et cetera. So when that power came on, we had an opportunity to test that 9 million gallons.
you pushed
and
it.
We pushed it. And that's what ultimately allowed the pressure to build and be able to get the water to
So
the
you
high
had
plains.
you had the legacy water treatment plant that's used to doing 15 million max, and then you added to it another 9 million, and that's kind of how you got it up to 30 million combined. I know it doesn't add up mathematically.
No,
but,
because,
yeah.
there's variations on that. But I
Right.
mean, that's generally the story. I mean, it's the way to describe it.
So if we didn't have the Hickory, what would happen is we probably would have waited another week to get
Oh,
water.
no, weeks.
Weeks? You think? Wow. Okay. All right, so let's talk, we talked about all the calamity.
Yes. Well, I want to, one of the things I like to talk about when we talk about this is, first of all, it wasn't the city of San Angelo only that were going through the problems with water lines breaking, et cetera. Every city in the state of Texas had the same thing. And also I say, people go, we've got to get those water lines fixed or replaced. Yeah, we do. But I also say to people, many people learn lessons about their own home.
Right.
The need for insulation on their homes, under their sinks, on the outside of their houses, because what then happened was it wasn't just the city with water lines, it was homes
Right.
that were having water line problems and leaks and breaks. So,
Or they might find a roof leak during a rainstorm.
yeah, same thing. And so you look at it and you go, it was compounded. So even once we got some people water,
Right.
their water lines broke in their homes.
Right.
It was just Murphy's Law, really. It just took over.
And it was all the mayor's fault.
It was all the mayor's fault once again, yeah.
Okay,